Hey, so we just barely survived all 500 days of January, huh? And here we are facing down February and all the existential dread therein. And listen, I have no answers, just returning anxiety disorder and a refilled prescription for muscle relaxers because my TMJ has been highly aggravated by everything. But what my plan for today is one, contact my reps, but two, we are going to talk about the books coming out in February because we can still celebrate these books. There is still joy to be found in reading and stories, and these authors still deserve their moment. They deserve our support, and we are just going to do our best. Now, with that best, I feel like I did very well in January compared to past months in terms of kind of editing down my list, staying focused. I was also sick, so that helped with that. Granted, I was sick for a lot of January, but I cannot promise that today. I was looking at my list of books I am interested in on whatever level, and I have over 30 titles in February. So that is a little terrifying, but we will persevere, and there are a lot of really exciting books coming out this month. So without further ado, because I will surely find a tangent somewhere yet, let's go ahead and dive into these books, except as usual, I have lied immediately. And before we get on without further ado, hi, my name is Melody. We talk about books and book adjacent things on this channel, and if any of that interests you and this is your first time here, I would love for you to hang out more. If it is not your first time here, I would also love for you to hang out more, and if you want to like and comment, that definitely helps. Now, with the commenting as well, while we have over 30 books that I have on my radar, this is still not even close to all the books coming out in February. So anything that I miss that you are excited about, go ahead and leave those below as well so that we can get the word out about these books, and maybe it is something that I will be interested in as well, and I love hearing about new books. And if you are also excited about books that I do mention, go ahead and feel free to share that excitement below as well. And if any of these are books that you would like to see kind of expedited or are interested in seeing a dedicated Feature Friday video on, please let me know that below as well. So now, for real, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the books that are coming out February 4th. Now, as is pretty typical lately anyway, the first new release Tuesday of the month is pretty loaded, so don't be surprised or shocked or concerned when I am lingering on the 4th a little bit longer. And also, if my arms make weird appearances, I do have a table with my laptop in front of me so I can be referencing these books, as well as my planner where I have everything listed out. I don't know that it is a great system, but it is a system nonetheless. So on the 4th, the first new release Tuesday of the month, the first book that I want to talk about is actually one of my most anticipated books of the year, and is the finale to a historical romance series that has been bringing me a lot of joy over the last couple of years. And that book is A Tropical Rebel Gets the Duke by Adriana Herrera, which is the finale of her historical romance series that has been just a delightful discovery. I was aware of it, but I read it after hearing her talk with Sarah McLean at Printers Row Lit Fest in Chicago, and my entire romance book club went together, and so I was able to get a signed copy, and I was able to hear her talk about it before reading it, which I think was really delightful in terms of the historical perspective. I love the historical perspectives that she has been bringing to these books, and that they are set in Paris most predominantly, so we get a little bit of a different setting in terms of that historical romance landscape. And most importantly for this book, it is the finale of the series, which means it is following Aurora and Apollo, who we have seen dancing around each other in the periphery for 2 books now. And I love the kind of school of having your romantic leads, or more specifically, your final couple, kind of set up through other books so that you really get to feel all of the tension and angst and build up leading up to that last book, or even not even the last. Like if we look at Sarah McLean, her last historical romance, there had been 2 books of lead up for Tommy and Imogen. And so I enjoy having that lead up. And from everything I am hearing about this book, the reviews from readers and historical romance readers I trust have been raving about this, and that the payoff of that lead up absolutely delivers, and I am so excited. I actually have seen advanced reads digital arcs of this floating around in the sense that I could request one, but I've held off because I want my first experience to be with the final copy that I have pre-ordered from Meet Cute bookstore, because they had a pre-order incentive campaign where they have artwork, a kind of traditional step back artwork that is given or gifted with the pre-order, and I am so excited for this beautiful artwork. I've never actually been swayed by artwork in a pre-order campaign like this, but it is absolutely stunning. And I think I talked about it a little bit in my historical romance video, my kind of state of historical romance video, because this is one of the ongoing historical romance series that has really been bringing me a lot of joy, like I mentioned, the last couple of years. And also, it has been just such a fresh, exciting perspective in the sense that this is Herrera's first historical romance series. And so the idea, as much as I'm excited and so excited for the finale here, I also have a little bit of fear in the sense that I want more historical romance from her, and I cannot be assured in any way that that is coming. And so I'm going to treasure and enjoy what we have, but if you would also treasure and enjoy what we have, it would definitely increase our odds of getting more. And I think as readers, amidst this really dark time, we absolutely deserve it. So anyway, I have this book pre-ordered. I will probably report back and unbox it with you because it will have those pre-order goodies, and I would like to share those with you as well. And ideally, we will be talking about it, of course, in a Feature Friday, because we have talked about the others in a Feature Friday, so be sure to check out those if you haven't as well. Now, speaking of anticipated romances, of course, we have the new Ali Hazelwood coming out this month as well. Deep End, which was notoriously renamed at some point. I don't know all of the backstory behind the renaming there. It has been getting rave reviews, which honestly I shouldn't be shocked for with a Hazelwood, but the kind of tenor of these reviews feels a little different. I also already have this on hold at the library, which is only notable in the sense that I've been doing a lot of Hazelwood's books since her first on audio, and I do feel led to read this in print this go around. We'll see if that changes. But that is where I'm currently, or the direction I'm currently leaning. This also, while it has a kind of STEM angle in terms of our female lead being in college and trying and working to get into med school, it does seem that this is more leaning into the sports angle of things, and that we are dealing with like high level, like Olympic level or Olympic qualifying level swimmers and divers in here. And they seemingly come to an arrangement, surely of the romantic nature, to kind of let off some steam that becomes more complicated emotionally. It would be logical to assume over the course of the book, and feelings get a little bit more involved there. So emotionally, based on that, it's feeling like a kind of combination of her most recent contemporary and kind of hearkening back to the Hazelwood contemporaries as we know them. And I will be very interested to see what I think here. I have not yet read her young adult, but otherwise I've read all of her adult contemporaries and her novellas, unless it is a Kindle or KU exclusive. I don't think I've read those, but I've really enjoyed her novels. I will say I didn't enjoy the novellas, and I talked about that before. There wasn't as much depth to them because there, aren't as many pages. There are constraints to the form, and it allowed kind of like her worst instincts to really be emphasized in terms of her emphasizing the kind of size difference between her leads and some of her kind of tropes, which are popular. Tropes are satisfying. That's not the issue. But it kind of highlighted how repetitive it is and didn't allow as much space for the kind of emotional nuance and build that I think works really well in her novels. I will also say, what I find really successful as a reader in her novels is they usually have some kind of outside antagonist or instigator in some way. And sure, that can feel a little over the top and contrived at points, but I kind of like that. It feels kind of reminiscent of what I would expect from that in a historical romance, and I do enjoy that kind of outside instigator in a lot of ways, especially if we're talking about the kind of prevalence of miscommunication, which her books absolutely still have too, and I'm talking more generally here. And there's often a kind of railing against miscommunication that I think often, sure, miscommunication is really frustrating, especially when it's not executed well in the book. But like I've said before as well, I think it would be disingenuous to pretend like we are all superstar communicators all the time. But I think the outside antagonist or that outside instigator helps give a little bit more shape or propulsion to some of those more interior movements in the novel as well. So look, we are 2 books in and I've already gone on 2 tangents. And honestly, Hazelwood, I feel like I have a habit of going on tangents for. Herrera, I don't even know if I really introduced Aurora and Apollo's whole deal, which unfortunately is even more pressing politically in the current climate. But Aurora runs an underground women's clinic, and Apollo has recently become begrudgingly a duke and inherited a title. And so he ends up offering her some protection for her work by using his title, but he is also resenting his title. And I think that there are, again, some outside instigators involved as well. Honestly, I'm gonna read it either way, but that's what's going on. Okay, next we have Never Gamble Your Heart by Lindsay Lovis, which I keep wanting to say Lindy Lovis instead of Lindsay Lovis, and I feel like I even had that issue when I reviewed or talked about her book, Never Blow a Kiss, which debuted last year and involved a governess who was actually also a spy. And here we have the second book, which involves another governess, which in the first we bumped into at a moment in the park, and she was a kind of distracted governess, and that is kind of her deal, but she has good reason to be distracted because part of the reason she got into this line is she is on the hunt for a runaway sister, and this hunt leads her, wait for it, to the notorious owner of a gaming hell, right in my wheelhouse. And so she ends up becoming a governess for him because he has a newly acquired charge, and he discovers that something else is going on, and so agrees to kind of help her in her search for her wayward sister. And at the same time, she has this lead, which originally drove her to this gaming hell, in, as the blurb says, when she discovers hasty marriages materializing between troublemaking women and men who don't deserve them. So I highly enjoyed the first book of this series. I do have, as I said, a feature Friday on that. I have this pre-ordered on Kobo, so I will have to remind myself Monday night that I will be getting charged for that. I kind of, in the moment, I like that I'm not charged immediately during a pre-order, but the older I get, the more I'd rather just be charged in the moment I'm deciding to make the purchase, and then it really is a gift to my future self, but it's a gift to myself either way. But even with those historical romance titles, we have some more coming out later in the month, but a solid start to February, and a way for us to celebrate and support the historical romance coming out this month. Next, to kind of take a sharp left turn, we have the newest book by Ali Smith called Glyph, which I really don't know a whole lot about. I have only read, I think, one of Ali Smith's season quartet, and I know she is a very celebrated writer. I just have not spent enough time with her work, but this is intriguing, even if it does have a dystopia tag on the Goodreads entry. And frankly, there are multiple dystopia tags for books this month in a way where I'm like, I'm already living in a dystopia at this point, though this, to its credit, feels like it is in conversation with kind of modernity and the modern moment in acknowledging that, but it's just, you know, my usual kind of railing against dystopias. And I'll have you know, I'm feeling very justified in that in this moment, though I know a lot of people are drawn to them for kind of similar but different reasons, in the sense that it makes them or gives them some sense of control or hope amidst all of the hopelessness, and I never begrudge that by any means. It just aggravates my anxiety personally and forces me to face, or forced me to face back when it didn't feel like a pressing reality, how tenuous everything is and how close to a dystopia we actually are. And hey, what do you know? Anyway, Glyph, according to the blurb, I'm just going to read it for you because it is very short and doesn't give me a whole lot to kind of extrapolate from or to extrapolate from it. It says, from a literary master, a moving and genre-bending story about our era-spanning search for meaning and knowing. An uncertain near future, a story of new boundaries drawn between people daily, a not very brave new world, and 2 children and a horse. And it does go on a little bit, but it doesn't give too much in terms of the meat and potatoes. I do want to commend the blurb writer. There are a couple of blurb writers who are going to get some gold stars today, for sure. But for some reason, the A Not Very Brave New World really is sitting with me. I really like that. The cover is intriguing. And of course, Ali Smith's voice is very celebrated. So I am very intrigued by this, especially as it is a commentary on the modern moment and what exactly that commentary will be. Very interested in that, but don't have a whole lot to speculate on there. Next, we have what appears to be an excellent option for those who like what I believe is kind of dubbed weird girl lit, The Lamb by Lucy Rose, which follows a mother and her daughter who live by the forest and are very isolated, and when strangers knock on their door, their fate may be of the more Hansel and Gretel variety, as evidenced by the very evocative cover there, so may have some squeamishness similar to we just discovered or explored with The Glutton, though I am willing to bet that this is very highly stylized and heightened in a way that involves some kind of remove from that, and so it feels a little bit more fantastical in that exploration, but I don't know. It also probably is written to shock, just to shock in some ways, and we'll see how successful that is. As we know, if you've been here for a second, that either is very successful for me or I find it frustrating, but the stasis of this book seems to be upset when a young girl named Eden, or a young woman named Eden, shows up at this cabin, and Margot is kind of forced, the daughter is forced to kind of face the shifting of her family dynamics and there being some draw, presumably, to this new stray. In some ways, the way the blurb is framed here or described feels reminiscent of Sue Rainford's Follow Me to Ground, if that was a book you enjoyed, but we will have to discover how closely those may be linked thematically together. Next, we have a more traditional dystopia, this time from Korean author Ewon Kim, The Black Orb, which follows black orbs that begin to appear in Seoul, and these orbs begin consuming people, forcing this kind of fleeing into the country, this mass exodus, looting and scavenging, and really upsetting the societal order. So it feels like there may be a sci-fi bend here as well. Maybe it is a little bit like Severance. I don't know. The book, not the show. The show not being the book continues to disappoint me, though I know that lots of people enjoy the show, and is also the reason that I didn't connect that the movie The Nickel Boys is actually based on the Colson Whitehead novel until too late, because I thought it was just another instance of me being inevitably disappointed. So I will have to swing back and see that movie and inevitably reread the book and be emotionally devastated all over again. That being said, jury's still out on how emotionally devastating The Black Orb will be, but it looks intriguing. Next, we have Enemy of My Dreams, which is a historical romance that seems to be between a Roman princess and a Visigoth warlord. I will say at one point it looks like potentially the blurb has been edited from when I first read it, because I swear the first time I read it, and it still has a romantasy tag, but the blurb had something about being a romantasy but without the fantasy, and I was like, so you mean a historical romance? And I have to assume it is some setting of expectations in terms of how the stakes play out and the kind of level and scope of things, because it does feel like it is going for a more epic scale. However, while it is clearly older, It does feel reminiscent, or like it would fit in with a lot of the like really early Highland romances or like medieval romances, or obviously earlier than that. There is now at least a historical romance tag on Goodreads as well, which I appreciate. And I do also appreciate that it is seemingly providing some historical romance, again, from different perspectives in terms of time period and place. And it looks like we have a kind of grand scale scope here in terms of our Roman princess kind of balking against a betrothal arranged by her brother, who has become the emperor, and in retribution to this, he has thrown her lover in the Colosseum, and so she basically arranges her own kidnapping with this Visigoth warlord as a political power play and presumably to rescue her lover. But I, and I'm sure you as well, as a very astute reader, have some alternate theories about where we are going to end up there. So I'm intrigued to see what this is going to bring to the table and if it's going to open up new historical perspectives for us as well. Very excited for the possibilities there. Next, in some vindication of my hypothesis that we'll start seeing some more fiction kind of set around revolutionary France, though to be fair and honest, this is but one example. We have The Woman in the Wallpaper by Laura Jones, which seems to be following 3 separate young women, including 2 sisters who begin to work at a wallpaper company after the death of their father, and they start noticing the same woman over and over in this wallpaper pattern. And this woman is the late wife of the company, the wallpaper company's owner. Meanwhile, one of the sisters begins to attract the attention of the company owner's son. And to further complicate matters, our other perspective is from this son's wife, who is an aristocrat, French aristocrat, and she feels above the world of this factory and also starts noticing this woman in this wallpaper pattern. And there is some intimation that maybe some events or scenes from the wallpaper begin to kind of reflect in real life and what exactly is going on, while the background of the novel is the kind of escalation of this revolutionary fervor. So very interested in what exactly that is going to be exploring. And obviously, I hope obviously, it feels like it's in conversation or meant to invoke the yellow wallpaper, but we will see. Speaking of being in conversation with, though this time presumably more loosely, we have Victorian Psycho by Virginia Fato, which I can't help when reading the blurb, though if any connection is surely very, very loose. I can't help thinking of The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, which, to be fair, I have not read since high school. But this does follow a governess in the Victorian era who is going out to a remote household to tutor 2 children, and she will only, according to the blurb, sometimes joke about eating children. And while there, she becomes privy to a lot of the sordid secrets of the house, while also being subject to the leers of the husband and the petty retributions of the wife. But our governess has something planned, potentially, for Christmas. And as the cover kind of hints at, I am fully expecting this to be at least a little bit unhinged. It is billed as both a thriller and a gothic, and I am very intrigued. There feels like there's a little bit, especially with that line about only sometimes joking about eating children, that there will be a kind of dark humor suffused throughout as well. I don't know, but very intrigued by this. Definitely, unfortunately, right up my alley. We'll see. Next, we have a nonfiction that I don't really know a whole lot about, have not heard a whole lot of buzz, but the subject matter sounds right up my alley, so I have hopes for it. And that is Hoodwinked: How Marketers Use the Same Tactics as Cults by Mara Einstein, with a foreword from Douglas Rushkoff. Now, I am fascinated with the kind of psychology and sociology behind cult think, and also the way we are influenced online, especially as this seems to be kind of focusing on kind of online tactics and how we are being kind of rewired to think about things. And so I'm in some ways expecting similar kind of thematic explorations as we got in Cultish, this kind of idea of these lighter tactics and kind of language tools that are used against our better instincts or interests. Word on the street also is that this book has a chapter or section on MLMs, and so I am of course very interested in that, especially as this will be from the perspective of an author I haven't heard speak on the subject before, as some of the bigger releases in anti-MLM books or books exploring MLMs recently have come from voices I'm a little bit more familiar with for their online work. But yeah, interested to kind of look at how marketing works online and the way we are being trained to think about things, and to kind of interrogate some of that. And just this idea of influence, especially amidst an ecosystem right now where there is a lot of discussion about no buys and low buys online. And while I have generally considered myself pretty conservative with money in terms of being very intentional with my spending, I have noticed even within the last couple of years spending a little bit more. Now granted, I'm an adult that has more disposable income than I did many years ago, but I am looking to tighten the reins on some of that. Now, that's not necessarily including books all of the way, because I do believe there's going to be a lot of importance in terms of spending with local indies this year, and I'm trying to work to be strategic about that. But as you've probably noticed, I have cut back on a lot of my book purchases recently as well. Like, I haven't really extensively reviewed any January books yet because I have been waiting for them to come in at the library. Now, granted, some of that is just that New Year hump, because a lot of the books that I talked about even last year were from the library as well, and I have consistently, throughout my time on this channel, utilized the library. But just food for thought. Next, we have a new book from Libba Bray, Under the Same Stars. And initially, I was so excited to see Libba Bray, and I promise that we will come back to excited. And then I noticed that it is following 3 timelines, and the first is set in 1940s Germany, and then 1980s Germany, and then 2020 New York City. And I was like, it's a World War II narrative. And I wasn't quite sure how I felt about that. But within the last couple of weeks, I was like, no, we need these right now, unfortunately, because despite the fact that we've been flooded with them for a decade, we still need to be reminded clearly about some of this. So despite my kind of spiraling out about some of that, and the fact that I actually have not yet finished the Diviner series, I am very excited for the return of Libba Bray. Libba Bray was one of the biggest authors of my time as a young adult reader, with, of course, A Great and Terrible Beauty, which I know and I'm sure doesn't hold up completely today. And I know Libba Bray has spoken herself about some of that as well. And a lot in the Diviners was kind of in conversation and kind of meant to be kind of correcting some of that in some way. But I'm very interested to hear her perspectives in this book, and I do believe she is one of our great young adult writers still, and I trust that this book will still demonstrate why she's the best of the best, and positions itself to be a very important perspective with the time periods it is drawing parallels seemingly between here. And so yeah, the return of Libba Bray. Next we have a book that caught my attention with its comps as The Cruel Prince meets The Selection, that being The Rose Bargain by Sasha Payton Smith, which seems to be a young adult historical fantasy romance set in an England where every citizen is guaranteed one gift from the Fairy Queen, though of course this gift will come at a price, and young society girls are expected to use this bargain on a gift that will attract suitors. But when Ivy season comes around, there is also a competition to win the heart of the Queen's Fae son, which thrusts Ivy not only into court politics, but presumably the politics and nuances of interactions with the Fae, and how different will those two be at the end of the day, beyond of course the magic. And then finally for the 4th, I know, take a deep breath, we made it, thank you for hanging in there with me, we have The Love Lyric by Christina Forrest, which is the newest contemporary romance from Christina Forrest and the finale to the Green Sisters series that started with The Neighbor Favor, which is the only one of the series that I have read so far. But this is following Iris, who is the director of partnerships for an up-and-coming beauty brand, as well as a single mother and widow, as she begins a romance with R&B star Angel. And so we have a celebrity romance here as well. And with that, let's go ahead and move on to the new releases for February 11th. First, we have The Crimson Road by AJ Slatter, which is described as being in the same universe as All the Murmuring Bones and The Briar Book of the Dead, which is a great reason for me to finally read my copy of All the Murmuring Bones. But because I haven't read these books yet, I don't know how tied the universe is together. They seem to be standalones just within the same universe, and presumably there would then be like some crossover or bleed, where if you've read the other books, you recognize those references, but if you haven't, you won't be completely lost. However, because I haven't read the books, I cannot say. I will say it's listed as a universe and not a series, so do with that as you will. This is described as a vampire book, and that's kind of what I know. Our protagonist Violet grew up being trained by her father to be a fighter in underground arenas, and when her father dies, she thinks she's free, and there is this world of possibility in front of her until she learns that her father had planned to send her into the Darklands. And when it becomes evident that she's not going to be able to just kind of simply outrun this fate, she is going to have to face it head on. She encounters a motley crew of sorts, it seems, but does ultimately kind of have to march into the Darklands to face off against whatever this is before she can begin this new life. So it definitely seems like it's going to have that kind of gothic, dark angle to it, as well as have this vampire lore of this world, whatever that is. And I continue to be intrigued by these kind of fantasy, historically coded universes, even if I haven't actually plunged into this one yet. I do definitely need to do that, and to be fair, I have one of the books, so I could at any time. I just have to get around to it, but this does look like a very intriguing entry into this world. And of course, with it as well, we have another vampire book. Next, we have another romance for February. We have Frenemies with Benefits by Cynthia Williams, which is the third in the Peachtree Cove series, which I have not yet read, but have heard good reviews about, and this cover is absolutely stunning, and the premise looks to be a lot of fun. It seems to be a small town romance, and our protagonist is at the center of the kind of small town rumor mill at the start of the book because her soon-to-be ex has had an affair that kind of pulls her into the spotlight along with that. But she just wants to focus on her bed and breakfast, which has won awards, though ultimately she decides if she's going to be at the center of the rumor mill anyway, why not have some fun with the cute guy from the nursery who supplies plants for all of her special events. So this looks like a really charming small town romance in the vein of small town romance I can get behind. Next we have You Didn't Hear This From Me, Mostly True Notes on Gossip by Kelsey McKinney, which is an exploration of kind of everyday gossip. The author I'm only kind of like vaguely familiar with as listed as the host of Normal Gossip, but I believe it's a podcast that just kind of collects like everyday gossip that you would have at brunch with your friends, which was something people were craving, especially during the height of the pandemic. But the book also seems to explore and have deeper conversations about the kind of role of everyday gossip and the sociology behind everyday gossip, which I am very interested in. It seems to be those kind of essays on kind of social culture, which is definitely a realm I am very interested in exploring. And I think this idea of everyday gossip is incredibly intriguing because it's often villainized, right? We are taught growing up not to gossip, but at the same time, like, how do we define gossip? Is gossip always malicious? There is something inherently intriguing about gossip. I will be the first to admit that, especially when I had roommates, I was very invested in gossip that had nothing to do with me. And so yeah, I'm interested in the kind of cultural critique of everyday gossip. And if we get some good everyday gossip along the way, listen, I'm not above it. Next, we have The Launch Date by Annabelle Slater, which I'm hopeful will end my dry run of being very disappointed in contemporary romances that explore or have an element of dating apps and modern dating culture and app culture, because even books by authors that I really enjoy, I found these books pretty lackluster, and it has been kind of a bummer. And so this seems like it has a little bit of an element of like the hating game to it as well, in that our two romantic interests here are working to develop an offshoot of a dating app and are testing out these in-person dates together. But there's also a competitive angle in that they are up for the same job. And as much as revisiting the hating game a couple of years ago, I found it a lot meaner than I remember the first time. I also loved that book when it came out. And so I am hopeful that this will have a lot of that spark that I enjoyed from that book, especially the first time, and also will be kind of in conversation with modern dating culture. Now, to be fair, I don't know if modern dating culture really is app culture as much either, or maybe I have just failed at modern dating culture to that extent. I don't know, but definitely interested in this one. Then we have First Time Caller by B.K. Borison, which I know more as being a highly coveted arc online. I have not yet read a B.K. Borison book, and maybe this will be my first because it has been getting great reception, because it involves the host of a romantic hotline, though I will be very interested to know the time setting of this book. Either way, it involves the host of a romantic hotline that has fallen out of love with love until he gets a call from a presumably precocious young girl who is looking to get some romantic help for her mother. And in the wake of this, said mother Lucy finds herself at the center of a lot of attention, and radio host Aiden finds himself working to help her find a happily ever after for the sake of romance and good ratings, until things start heating up behind the scenes as well. Next, we have The Spirit Collection of Thorn Hall by J. Ann Thomas, which involves a woman who is the kind of steward of her family's mansion, which has been frozen in time since the Gilded Age, and she is the roommate of around 15 spirits who share this manor, frozen in time, until one of the child spirits causes some damage, forcing her to seek out some help and restoration, which brings her in contact with a man with a lot of ideas of modernization for the manor, forcing our protagonist to kind of battle with protecting and preserving what she has always known, or making the choice to step into the future. And this involves spirits and the Gothic, but also has these elements, presumably, from what I'm gathering, of kind of romance and whimsy, and so I am very intrigued. Next, we have a young adult fantasy, The Forest King's Daughter by Ellie Blake, which starts with the friendship between a forest princess and a lonely demon boy, until the lonely demon boy gifts this princess a trinket, or what he thought was a trinket, and ends up starting a war between these realms, in which they are torn apart and will not meet again until they meet as enemies much later, and are forced to kind of reckon with this past as this demon is intent on gaining back this ring that actually has a lot of power, and our forest princess is now using within battle in context of this war. And this reintroduction forces them onto an adventure together, as well as forces them to kind of revisit their friendship and re-examine their current situation. Next, we have Where Shadows Bloom by Catherine Bakewell, who is the author of Flowerheart, which again, I haven't read yet, though I do own on Kobo through a sale. But this seems to be a fantasy, a young adult romantasy actually, which involves two young women. One, Ophelia, who has spent her life dreaming of La Chateau Enchantée, the mysterious court free of the shadow monsters plaguing the realm, and Lope, a young knight who has spent her life defending Ophelia and her home from these shadows, even as she dreams of running away with Ophelia. But when the shadows get too close to home, they are sent on an adventure that leads to La Chateau Enchantée, which has more secrets than it first appears to. And finally, for the 11th, no, of course I have not forgotten, we have Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales by Heather Fawcett, which is the third in the Emily Wilde series, this time thrusting us into the land of the Fae and Fairy as Wendell reclaims his throne in the fairylands, making Emily a fairy queen, or a soon-to-be fairy queen, and giving her access to this land that she has spent her entire life studying. Though, of course, there are the complications still of Wendell's stepmother and what exactly she has up her sleeve, especially as she has disappeared. And so I'm very excited for what this venture fully into fairy is going to bring into the world of this book, and how the tone is going to change, as well as how we are going to continue to kind of center. Here we have the Compendium of Lost Tales, you know, following maps and encyclopedias, and I'm very interested how much further we can take these concepts in this series, because they are fun and fabulous, but also how many more things can we think of, and is the series limited by how many things we can think of? Because I'm having a grand old time, and I'm very excited to see what further we get in this book, and I don't think it requires that much introduction. And with that, let's go ahead and move on to February 18th, starting with a book that I think may win the cover competition for me for the month. If you have strong feelings about which cover you think is the best of the month, let me know, but I think that this is a very strong contender, especially for kind of like weird literary fiction with a historical bend, which I admittedly love, and that book is Hungerstone by Kat Dunn, which is a historical fiction, a horror, and most importantly, a reimagining, a retelling of the novel Carmilla, the first, I want to say the first vampire novel. I almost introduced this as a sapphic reimagining, and that would be a bald-faced lie, because Carmilla, on its own, is sapphic. I have not read Carmilla since college. I read it, I want to say my junior year, and I read a free Kindle edition at the time because, of course, it was a famous vampire novel, so I was interested, especially when I found out there was queer subtext. I'm very much anticipating this being a buzzy book of the month, especially for literary fiction readers, and we absolutely deserve a vampire gothic right now. I think we've earned it. Is there a conversation to be had about the resurgence of vampire fiction when vampire fiction historically has been a way to explore suppressed urges and desires? Absolutely there is. This isn't the time for that. I've gone on enough tangents, but surely if we talk about this book in a Feature Friday, that is something we could talk about. Okay, next we have Cursebound by Sarah El Orifi, which is the second in the Feybound series, the first of which came out last year. I did a Feature Friday on it, and I will admit, the more distance I have from the immediate reading experience of that, the more I'm kind of reevaluating whether I want to return to the world, because the romance part of it, because it is a romantasy, felt a little underdeveloped to me. However, the world is still intriguing and there is that spark there that I'm interested in. So I am interested in continuing. I will be very interested to see what the reviews of this second book look like and where we end up going in this second book, because I'm going to be honest with you, the blurb is not really giving us much other than that the war between the Fae and the elves heats up. So I will be interested to see how this continues. I will be interested to see how some of the reveals from the end of the book, which I am just remembering in this moment, to be honest, play into the second book. I don't know. I don't know that this will be at the top of my priority pile, but I am still very intrigued and I think that there's a lot of promise there. So we'll definitely be keeping my eye out. And yeah, if you have read this already, or by the time you see this, let me know what you think about the continuation of this series. Okay, next we have Upon a Starlit Tide by Kel Woods, which is billed as a historical fantasy kind of combination of The Little Mermaid meets Cinderella, so very much leaning into this fairy tale-esque kind of atmosphere, and it does seem to ultimately be involving the Fae, as well as a protagonist who wants to be a sailor, who is potentially thrust a little bit more into not only this political realm, but this magical political realm, as well as some of the secrets of the sea. So I'm very interested in what exact angle this takes and how it plays both into the kind of historical fantasy that we've been seeing lately and romantasy of that, as well as this kind of fairy tale, more historical angle that it seems, and realm that it seems to be playing in as well. I don't know, but I'm very interested in the voice and tone of this for sure, and I'm looking forward to discovering something new. And then we have another contemporary romance, You Between the Lines by Katie Naiman, which seems to be a little bit beach read meets Legally Blonde. It involves our protagonist Lee getting into a prestigious MFA poetry program where she comes face to face with a high school nemesis who kind of look down on her and her work. There is a lot of emphasis in the blurb placed on this idea of her being a sorority girl and this idea of her being perceived as kind of frivolous. The blurb mentions that she knows more about the lyrics of Taylor Swift than T.S. Eliot, and I am hopeful and sure that the book will unpack some of this. I feel like we've moved beyond some of these stereotypes of sorority girls, and I think reducing women in this way is reductive and something of the past that we had kind of moved beyond. Like Legally Blonde really broke out and complicated and was in conversation with those stereotypes, and I feel like those stereotypes have really been kind of challenged a lot in the decades since. Additionally, like Taylor Swift lyrics, there have been entire classes taught on Taylor Swift lyrics and the intertextuality not only in her body of work, but the way that it is in conversation with other work, including the Romantic poets and other poets. I'm not saying T.S. Eliot is a Romantic poet, but still, there is a depth there that I don't think is given enough credit. And I know, again, that that is a lot of what this book is probably surely in conversation with and challenging, but I do think that leaning into that in the blurb, it feels, I don't know, I feel some type of way about it, I think. But I am interested in challenging these ideas in the book, watching these two go head to head with that unresolved romantic tension, and surely shading the kind of atmosphere and culture of MFAs even a little bit. Next, we have Yours Eventually by Noura Masnavi, which is a second chance romance, it seems to be, following a close-knit Pakistani-American community. And it follows Asma, who has really stepped into a central role in her family following the death of her mother, and she thinks that she is very fulfilled, especially in her career as a doctor. And then her college sweetheart Farouk comes back into the picture, and he's now one of the most eligible bachelors after being involved in a really successful startup. But when they were sweethearts, Farouk was turned down by her family, and now he is kind of re-entering her social circles, causing her to kind of reevaluate her current circumstances in life and whether there's the possibility for a second chance at love. Next, we have Unhallowed Halls by Lily Wilkinson, which is a young adult gothic, which involves a boarding school deep in the Scottish moorlands, a secret society, and potential ties to demonic magic, as well as just garden variety secrets. And honestly, that is all I need to know. Finally, for the 18th, we have Wooing the Witch by Stephanie Burgess. This is kind of seemingly kind of on the line between romantasy and fantasy romance, but it is also billed as irreverent, with a romance between a wicked and feared evil sorceress and the mysterious dark wizard who has been hired to help sort out her library, who is actually a nerdy archduke on the run with no magical ability whatsoever. So I don't know, this looks like a fun time. And with that, we are almost there. We have made it to February 25th, the last new release Tuesday of the month. So just hang in with me for these last 7-ish titles, and I promise to try and go as quickly as I can while still giving these books their proper due. The first book of this release week that I have my eye on is Sword Heart by T. Kingfisher. I am woefully behind on T. Kingfisher books, and I know that she is a beloved voice, especially in fantasy right now, for good reason. And this is her newest fantasy romance, and this involves housekeeper Hala, who has inherited her great uncle's estate. Unfortunately, there are some family members that seemingly have some feelings about this. But in the midst of this, she unknowingly, presumably, unleashes Sarkin, an immortal swordsman, who then becomes her protector and presumably something more. So I am very anxious to see what spin to this T. Kingfisher brings, especially with her kind of unique sense of humor as well. I am very much looking forward to this one. Speaking of T. Kingfisher, if you are looking for something to read after Sword Heart, this next book is billed for fans of T. Kingfisher, and that is Green Teeth by Molly O'Neill, which is an adult fantasy, oddly enough billed as cozy because it is following Jenny Greenteeth, which, to be fair, I only know through the context of the Carol Churchill play The Striker, which is by no means cozy. So I am interested to see this mythology get a more centralized exploration. So this follows the lake monster Jenny Greenteeth and her needle-sharp teeth, and the witch that is thrown into her lake that Jenny decides is worth saving. And this witch Temperance has to face why her town has seemingly suddenly turned against her in wake of the new pastor in town. So yeah, like I said, I'm very interested to see the kind of mythological explorations here and the folklore that is infused, and also how the tone translates, because there is seemingly some discord here in like my expectations based on the blurb and this folklore figure of what the tone would be versus this like cozy presentation, at least according to some of the categorizations. So very excited to find out for myself. Next, we return with a couple more historical romance titles for the month. The first being While the Duke Was Sleeping by Samara Parrish, who I have not read for a while. I think I've only read one of her books. Based on the title, I do anticipate this is a reimagining of While You Were Sleeping, and allow me to be blasphemous for just a second. I don't remember much about that movie because I wasn't super invested in it. I think it was I watched it when I was a teenager, and I don't really I get uncomfortable with like lying. And so the whole plot being around this reveal and whatnot just made me uncomfortable, and I had trouble like being invested. The conceit here feels like it will allow me to buy in a little easier, in that it involves Adelaide, our protagonist, pretending to be her mistress for a couple of days to break off her mistress's engagement with her fiance, who is currently in a coma, whenever he wakes up. And in the meantime, this fiance's brother has come back because presumably he will be inheriting the estate somewhat soon, potentially based on current circumstances. But he knows that this woman is not who she says she is, but keeps feeling drawn to her. So there's enough kind of reasonable suspicion there that I can definitely get on board. Next, we have the first in a new historical romance series from Megan Frampton, The Devil's Charm, involving Lord Luthien, who, according to the blurb, is a quintessential second son and an excellent rake, though I do not think we ever call him a rake, and Lady Diantha, who is always very proper, except for the moment she isn't at a friend's wedding, but it is okay because the next morning she can return to normal, and she has a project to kind of redirect her focus and get her back into her kind of proper package. Except this project, which is set to end a family feud, involves her working very closely with Lord Luthien, who she was very improper with at this friend's wedding. Next, we have Fagin by Alison Epstein, who was the author of A Tip for the Hangman, the historical fiction about Marlowe I enjoyed. Was it a couple of years ago now? I think it was a couple of years ago now. And this is a reimagining of Fagin from, of course, Dickens's Oliver Twist, which is very interesting because I went through a huge Dickens phase in like high school, I want to say, where I have not read Dickens's entire body of work, which will be evident very soon here, but I've read more than nothing for sure. I've read A Tale of Two Cities, which I would count as my favorite. I need to revisit that soon. I've read A Christmas Carol, that feels like a given. I've read Great Expectations. My potentially controversial opinion is that is actually my least favorite Dickens of the ones I've read. I read David Copperfield. I need to revisit that. I loved David Copperfield when I read it. I wanted to dress up as Uriah Heep for Halloween one year because I'm nerdy like that. To be fair, I feel like that is all I have read. So I do have a lot more I need to read, including Oliver Twist, which is interesting because I am also a theater student. I have a theater degree, and while I was not a musical theater student, I do love musical theater. Oddly enough, Oliver is actually one of my least favorite musicals. I love a lot of the music from Oliver, but it's a very dark story, and even though I like Dickens and recognize Dickens as dark, I have never gravitated toward Oliver, though of course I did love watching it in elementary school. One year, that was our musical, and I marvel every year that that was the musical we watched. It was like third or fourth grade. I don't know. Anyway, I do still need to read Oliver Twist. And this is, of course, a reimagining of Fagin and the backstory behind Fagin and Oliver Twist, and looks to have some overlap with a lot of the characters we know from Oliver Twist. So I'm very, very interested to see what perspective Epstein brings to this retelling. Maybe it will push me over the edge into finally reading Oliver Twist, but no promises. I do feel like I have enough of the outline of the knowledge of Oliver Twist to still appreciate this retelling as a retelling, but I guess we'll see. Next, we have Something in the Walls by Daisy Pierce, which is a thriller involving a child psychologist who is connected with a young girl, Alice, who believes she is being haunted by a witch. And so our psychologist, Mina, goes to Alice's remote village, anticipating Alice to make a quick recovery under her care, only for Alice's condition to exacerbate, and Mina to find out more about this town's history with witchcraft and superstition. And so I am very interested to find out how the witchcraft angle kind of plays into all of this, as well as the history that is surely going to be explored through this as well, and the history of witchcraft that will be explored. So very much interested in that, and is also bringing a newer angle to a thriller in a way that is really exciting for me. And then finally, the last book of the month I have my eye on, which was a late edition, but I saw the following thread, which I will put up, and how could I resist? It said, I'm reading a book that's like Divine Rivals meets a darker shade of magic, and it's so good. And those are two things I very much love. And so I am very hopeful that I will also love The Otherwhere Post by Emily J. Taylor. And reading the description, I absolutely understand where those comps would come from. This follows Maeve, who after the death of her father has been living under an assumed identity to escape his past crimes until she receives a letter that simply says, "Your father was innocent." And so in an attempt to uncover the truth, she joins the Otherwhere Post, where she will be trained to deliver letters to other worlds. But amidst this, her mentor, who the blurb does make sure to mention is infuriatingly handsome, knows that Maeve is keeping something secret and that she is hiding something, and things escalate and the stakes raise, and I am very intrigued and hopeful for what this will be. And with that, we have covered what I am excited for in February. I feel like I have been talking for 1,000 years, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that means that this has been a suitable distraction. But thank you if you were still here for going along for the ride with me. Again, if you have other books that are on your radar and you are excited about, please leave those below. Let me know what you're excited about from what we've talked about today. Let me know what you would love to hear about in a future Friday. But as always, thank you for hanging out. Like and subscribe if you feel like it. Read something good. And yeah, bye.